According to dictionary.com, the classical definition of a zombie is a mute and willless body, robbed of its soul, and given the semblance of life by a supernatural force, usually for manual labor or some evil purpose. Did you know that your computer allows zombies to come to life and take your sensitive data on behalf of the evil force controlling it? I will show you that right now on my own machine. Here we have an attacker and a victim, both operating on the same physical core. The victim is my local macOS machine, innocently doing what it needs to do. Maybe it is processing my password as I type it in, or my credit card information as I do some online shopping. This is represented here by an application called Secret, where the user gives one letter as input. This letter is our sensitive information. Over here, running on the same physical core, but in a Linux virtual machine, is our attacker. Our attack program, Leak, is going to access the memory being used by the victim's secret application and read the secret letter from the victim. When I start up the attack program, you will see a histogram of the 26 letters of the alphabet. As the attacker sees a letter, it adds to the count in the histogram. Right now, we won't see anything in particular, just general distribution across the letters, different characters that are currently in memory. Now let's have our victim input its secret letter. Let's say our sensitive data is the letter A. We start our secret application, and immediately over in our attacker, you can see here the count for A starting to spike. Yikes, okay, that's not good. The attacker seems to know our letter. Maybe this was just luck. Let's try a different letter. If we stop sending A, and let's say we send something else, like R. Let's see what happens over here. In our attacker, let's give it a moment to see what it sees. Then if we go ahead and pause this, we can take a look. We see spikes here, certainly for A, has a large count, and for R as well, we see quite a large count. So the attacker definitely knows our secret letters. This may seem silly, it's just A and R, but remember this sensitive information could really be passwords, credit card information, or other private data. So how did we get here? How is this possible? And what can we do?
So what happened there? Well, first let's talk about some of the underlying hardware that makes this exploit possible. CPUs nowadays have a lot of power. So much power, in fact, that often they get done with their computation in time to spend most of their time just waiting on responses from other processes. So if we want to squeeze more power out of our CPUs, what we can do is hyperthreading, where when a processor is done running one process and is waiting on a response from another one, they can just pause this process and do a separate process in the meantime. Thus, we end up with multi-threading on a single processor, hyperthreading. One of the ways that hyperthreading is used is with speculative execution, where while the program is waiting for response at some branching path, let's say the process reaches an if-else statement and is waiting on a response from whether it should go if or else, then it will transiently execute or speculatively execute both possible branches. Then, once it eventually learns which branch it's supposed to actually take, it can just discard the unused branch and continue down the correct path that has been pre-computed. This makes processors go much faster. Intel claims this can speed them up by as much as 30%. But it causes problems because despite some of Intel's early guarantees, this breaks process isolation. No longer are processes completely independent from each other, but because they share a core, they can leak over into each other. This was revealed and exploited by two exploits in 2018 January, Meltdown and Spectre. Let's have a look at how they work. So let's say you're an attacker and you're trying to access a secret. What's supposed to happen is you try to access it. The targeting user permissions check. The check returns false, and then you are denied access. But with the power of speculative execution and Meltdown, You try to access a secret, the target includes a permissions check, and then it speculatively executes whatever that secret is, speculating that you will have permission. Once it's in memory, the attacker can read it from memory with side channel attacks. Eventually, the permission check will return false, and the secret will be wiped away, but by then, it's too late. This opened up a new field of transient execution attacks, which got particularly bad in May of 2019 with the advent of Zombieload. With Zombieload, the target runs some process with a secret you want to see, and then it runs some other process. But first, you fault the target. The target halts the second process too and re-enqueues it, but before it can rerun it, it will speculatively execute this process using the stale secret arguments left over from process one. The attacker can read the results from memory and then reverse engineer what those secrets were, effectively letting the attacker monitor everything the target is doing. But it gets worse. One step further, in March 2020, load value injection took it one step further. Rather than just letting the process run on its own with secret arguments, load value injection controls these arguments. The attacker runs some process with controlled arguments, and eventually process two will be speculatively executed with those arguments. Letting the attacker run transiently whatever it wants on the target's machine and reveal anything. So how do we defend against this?
There's no good defense, really? Well, the best security solution would be to disable out-of-order execution, hyperthreading, and speculative execution altogether. Without these features, there is no vulnerability to exploit. However, these features are important to the performance of modern-day computers. Disabling them completely would really hurt the performance that we see. So what do? We have this trade-off where if we want good security, we're going to have poor performance. And if we want to keep good performance, we leave these security vulnerabilities there to be exploited. And in fact, the official response from Intel about this vulnerability in all of their processors really shows where they stand on this trade-off. They've classified these vulnerabilities as a low to medium severity, citing that there are no reports of this exploit being used in the real world, and so it's not that big of a deal. They've released a few little patches, but they have not done much at the hardware level overhaul with the vulnerabilities that have been disclosed. And if that makes you uncomfortable, you're not alone. Linux creator Linus Torvalds has said that all of this is pure garbage. The way that Intel has responded does not take this threat seriously, and it is a real threat. The security researchers who disclosed these vulnerabilities in the first place have tested the microcode updates that Intel has provided and still saw leaks, even with these mitigations enabled. And there seems to be little incentive for Intel to change course. There's no pressure from consumers to patch up these security vulnerabilities. The mitigations that they have released are not enabled by default. As a user, you have to know to go and enable these mitigations to protect yourself. And people just don't know, and there's no pressure for anything to change. So where does that leave us? Well, we have these attacks that take advantage of out-of-order execution, hyperthreading, speculative execution, and allow an attacker to read data from processes that they should not have access to. And currently, there is no good defense against them.